In the intro to most of my videos, I discuss either the history of products or the market itself. And honestly, when it comes to discussing what's happened in the GPU market over the past couple of years, well, it's been a time, hasn't it? It's not just because of the shortages, of course, but there have been so many important and influential releases, not just in terms of the architecture, but in terms of the underlying technology. Hardware-based ray tracing is no longer this buzzword, it's part of so many launches of games now, and upsampling such as Nvidia's DLSS, AMD's FSR, along with tons of other solutions which are baked into game engines such as Unreal, and of course other technology which is going to be so important for PCs going forward, such as direct storage, mesh shading, and so on and so on. Basically, it seems that so much has changed in such a short period of time, but also so much we're still waiting for and for the market to adopt it. To this end, when Intel were first rumoured to be launching a discrete range of GPUs which were aiming to compete with Radeon and GeForce, we were like, how are they going to do that? And of course, when they formally announced it and we started to see Raja Koduri assemble his team, it was definitely interesting, but there was a lot of questions. How would they compete? If you've just built a shiny new PC, you'll need a genuine copy of Windows, so you can enjoy all of the features such as personalized themes and of course getting rid of that annoying activation watermark. We're partnering with WhoKeys to give you guys great discounts on Windows 10 keys, and throughout November there's a 30% off discount by using the coupon code RGT during checkout. I've purchased several keys from them in the past under a personal non-RGT affiliated account, and they've all worked flawlessly, with delivery being rather quick. After November, the coupon code reverts back to 25% off, so if you want to pick up a copy of Windows for as little as $12 or a cheap and legit copy of Office, then check out the links in the video description below and use coupon code RGT. Sure, Intel have had efforts before, such as Larrabee, and technically speaking, IGUs have been a thing with Intel for so long now, but that's a very different thing to having a solution which compete with either Lisa Su or Jensen Huang's best offerings. It's like, yeah, just high-performance GPUs are so competitive at the moment, and Nvidia, especially when it comes to servers with things like CUDA, it's a tall order. And I remember when I was first attending GDC 2019 with the event known of course as Odyssey. I was asked by Intel to attend the event, and they asked many other influencers, and this was spurred on at least my participation because I created a video and I asked you guys, what do you want Intel to bring to the table for high performance graphics? And it was a video, honestly, that I didn't think would get that much attention. I was just curious, but it seemed Intel were listening. And when I attended the event, and I got to meet some people, including Raja Koduri briefly, it was a very interesting experience. There was an awful lot of passion from the Intel team, and honestly from the attendees themselves. There was a lot of excitement. I think we all know that additional competition is only ever a good thing. It's hard to argue that while Sony and Microsoft are very different in terms of what they bring to the table compared to Nintendo, the world would be a lot poorer in terms of gaming anyway without Nintendo. So again, the question was, how would Intel compete? And would the product become, well, let's just not mince words, would it even launch? Intel at the time were getting their butts kicked in a number of different markets, including of course desktop, where AMD were really rising on top. I'm sorry, I had to. But yeah, just in general, it's been a very interesting couple of years. And fast forward to now, we have Intel's product roadmap. And Intel's roadmap, in terms of names anyway, they're definitely a lot different. With AMD, you have Stars, you've got Vega, Polaris, Nave, and so on. And with Nvidia, well, it's all scientists, mathematicians, such as Lovelace. But well, Intel definitely went a bit more magical, if you excuse the phrase, with Druid, Alchemist. And while those names are certainly invoking of coolness, the question is, how will they compete? Well, that's what we're going to be discussing in this very video. Now, I am wearing an Intel Graphics hoodie here because, well, while I am creating this video on my own accord, I want to be clear, this is not sponsored, although Intel did send me the hoodie. I do want Intel to succeed in the market. Now, if you've not watched my videos previously, I want to be abundantly clear. This is not because I prefer Intel. I love AMD. I love Nvidia. I love their products. I think that they are all incredibly important for the ecosystem. But that's the key, right? Ultimately, while I love technology, I'm creating this content for you guys because, well, I like conversing with you all, but also because the products at the end of the day, you know, you being able to purchase them, you being able to enjoy them, and to the point, those products being good is so important. And not only does additional competition in the market benefit us as gamers, but it also just moves the industry forward at a more rapid pace. I won't wax lyrically of the early 90s and early 2000s and how we started to see so much innovation in not just the 3D space, but also CPUs because of the competitiveness. But all you need to do is take a cursory glance at how Zen has given Intel a kick in the butt in processors with Alder Lake and subsequent architectures, and of course how AMD now are starting to pull out all of the stops because they know that Intel are gaining momentum again. And I think it's fair to say that this is only ever a good thing for all of us. The first thing is that Intel Alchemist does launch in Q1, and while Intel have been somewhat cagey whether this is mobile, desktop or simultaneously, regular viewers will know that I've said that Intel's goal right now is to push Intel into mobile as a huge and high priority. Indeed, from what I've been hearing from multiple sources, this is a big reason for Nvidia, for example, refreshing its mobile RTX series of cards. I've already been told that they will debut RTX 30 Super or Refresh or whatever it ends up being called for mobile at CES next year. Intel knows how to market though, and quite early on, I'd been given two rather conflicting performance targets regarding Intel's solutions. The first was RTX 3060 Ti, possibly 3070 at best, and the other from RTX 3080. Here's the thing though, both of those sources, well actually several of those sources, were all very reliable, but yet there was such a huge performance gap. How can this be explained away? Well, you could easily say early silicon, beta drivers. Well, beta drivers are beta. But I'm inclined to believe that instead, this was an early sign that we were hearing performance targets for mobile, with the RTX 3080 mobile-ish performance being RTX 3070-ish on desktop. I'm still hearing the same performance targets for desktop, by the way. In worst cases, it seems to trade blows with an RTX 3060 Ti. Generally though, it's 3070. Outside of performance targets, we are pretty sure that the highest end SKU will feature 512 execution units, and Intel has already shown off a few basic diagrams pertaining to architecture. Bottom line is that Intel, much like say AMD's Radeon or Nvidia's GeForce cards, are comprised of blocks, so to speak, which can be slotted together, technical term, to create more performance. In Radeon, you can think of these as workgroup processors, which then form the basis of shader engines. With Intel, we have the Xe core, which actually has 16 vector engines and 16 matrix engines. As an aside, the matrix engines are what run XMX instructions, known as Xe matrix extensions, which can run a host of machine learning operations, including speeding up XeSS, its upsampling solution. As you can see from these diagrams, there's a number of other things associated with an Xe core and rendering slices. There are 4 Xe cores that create a slice, and then in turn, those render slices form a larger, more powerful GPU, tied together by things such as caches and memory controllers. 4 RT cores also reside in each render slice, and from what I'm hearing, RT performance of Intel's GPU is pretty competitive with Nvidia. All in all then, it's believed that the top 512 execution unit SKU will sport 8 render slices, meaning a total of 32 Xe cores. That's 8 render slices times 4 Xe cores per slice. This, in turn, will provide 512 matrix and vector engines, that's 16 per core, and a total of 4,096 ALU. Intel's solution is an evolution of designs we've seen previously from the company, and again, that does make sense. For what it's worth, by the way, I'm hearing that their future designs are going to be changing quite a lot from what we're seeing here with Alchemist, but I'll discuss possibly that more in a separate video, as I feel it's a bit early to discuss that with my very preliminary, very early information. As for configurations, we've discussed them several times previously, but the highest end SKU 512 execution units is outfitted with 256-bit memory bus and either 8 or 16 gigs of RAM. I've personally heard conflicting things, some telling me that 8 gigabytes is only for mobile, while others telling me that 16 gigabytes is a premium offering. 384 execution units at 192-bit memory bus with 12 gigabytes of RAM and a configuration of 256-bit 8 gigabytes of RAM for 256 execution unit model. Clock speeds are not known yet. Last I heard, SKUs were touching close to 2 GHz. I've been told that 8 GHz was passed, and someone told me 2 GHz was as well, but they weren't super confident to tell me the exact clock frequencies. I'm also hearing that mobile cuts clocks back, for example, by a decent margin. You guys can think why, power consumption, heat, that kind of jazz. The few demos we've seen of XeSS are impressive, although it's too early to give it a discussion of pros and cons. We've seen a few demos released to the public though, and it's upsampling from 1080p to 4K. This is a 4 times increase in pixel count, and it's impressive from the demos, but again, limited demos do not necessarily equate to experiences that we'll get at home. It uses a neural network for upsampling, and generally speaking, I'm very interested to see how the market responds to this, given it's more open in nature compared to DLSS. Intel is promising that XeSS can double your frame rates, but offers sometimes a better than native image quality at 4K, despite just using a 1080p input. They've also commented that XeSS is going to have a robust roadmap, including version 2 and 3, with generally the improvements you would expect. In another video, I discussed DLSS 3 from Nvidia, and I've now had yet another source tell me that it is definitely in the pipeline. I'll link that video in the description for that topic, but the highlights of what I was told was that there will be major image improvements, big improvements to performance, especially ray tracing, and some other surprises from Nvidia, which I can't talk about yet, unfortunately. Basically, Nvidia is not going to let Intel take the upsampling crown without a serious fight. DLSS 2.x has been a huge success for the company, with over 120 titles now released with DLSS, and a lot more ready to jump in. In fact, I'm hearing that PlayStation will be a big supporter of it. The big thing, though, which has flown under the radar from Intel, isn't necessarily specifications, pricing, or even the features, but instead Intel's strategy, and I want to spend a few minutes of the video discussing this. I've already discussed their takeover, or at least attempted takeover of the mobile market. And yeah, I'm even more confident of this as yet more sources have come out and told me that this is indeed the plan. Intel plus Intel solutions will be something that Intel will be pushing heavily, and they've got huge amounts of marketing development funds earmarked for this, and Intel has a marketing machine which is quite hard to argue with. You can imagine how companies which create laptops are going to be very keen to have the efforts of Intel help market their products, especially in such a competitive landscape. But yeah, past this, and perhaps even more importantly, is the team that Intel Graphics are assembling. Of course, names such as Raja Koduri generally make the headlines, but a number of PR folks I regularly spoke with or know and say AMD have also moved to Intel. I'm not going to name names, as I don't think that's fair to anyone involved. Despite stuff being in the public eye, I'm going to keep my personal contacts of who I talk to, kind of out of the spotlight here. But outside of that, and arguably just as important, is the talent which have jumped to Intel responsible for things such as developer relations. Intel has just recently announced big names joining the team, such as Jim Black and Steve Bell. Steve, for example, is Intel's new Senior Director of Game Developer Relations. What does this mean? Well, Intel has outright said that eventually XeSS will become open source, and these individuals are going to have huge ramifications throughout the industry. And while individuals come from AMD and churn is normal, it's a great indicator that Intel is spending huge, massive efforts with games developers for Intel-sponsored titles. I think at this point it's a given that there's going to be a large number of games going forward which are going to have splash screens like powered by Intel graphics or Intel CPUs, and naturally have a lot of Intel technology. What about pricing? Well, originally I was told that Intel's strategy was to possibly even sell the GPUs at cost, but yeah, realistically speaking, the target of 512 execution unit cards targeting 350 to 400 is possibly just not going to happen anymore. And this is for a number of reasons. First of all, the market has changed a lot. And Intel are now farming out production, of course, to TSMC, which had been rumored for some time. The thing is, though, TSMC themselves have increased the prices. And it's not just in terms of TSMC, just everything, just throughout the board right now is just more expensive. And, well, Intel as well have had a number of changes in terms of management. Raja is now directly responsible for the P&L, profit and loss, over at Intel Graphics. Basically, when cheaper prices were floating around, it was at a time it wouldn't directly reflect on Intel Graphics books like it would now. And the third, well, next generation parts, baby. Oh boy. Yeah, I mean, I'll talk more about this possibly in another video, but long story short, the next generation cards from AMD and Nvidia are going to be, well, let's say pricey. Yes, they are going to be considerably more expensive than what we have now. And I'm referring here, of course, to MSRP prices because, well, it becomes messier if we don't discuss MSRP. But yeah, I'm even hearing that AMD could be more expensive than Nvidia, thanks to the dual GCD configuration of Navi 31. At the end of the day, pricing is still too early to really get an accurate readout. Like, you can't really price it to the dollar, but you can start to make some educated guesses, and obviously pricing targets are something that still are being discussed. And when you consider that Navi 31, the highest end SKU, is like 75 T-flops, and 21 is like 25, 26 T-flops, well, you can start to see just how expensive these parts can be, even if they're more conservative with things like memory. Given that AMD are possibly going to have a higher end part, I do suspect that it's possible that Lovelace could be a little cheaper, although of course AMD also have the benefit of chiplets, and Nvidia are going to be a monolithic die. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all of that plays out in the longer term. I've also said that Alchemist is probably going to be replaced fairly quickly. Let's just be honest, RTX 3070 performance at a decent price now sounds great. The thing is though, if Lovelace is 2 to 2.4 times faster, well, an RTX 3070 is not going to sound too great then. It's going to be the equivalent of one of the lowest end SKUs from the RTX 40 lineup. So again, well, yeah, Nvidia would just absolutely ruffle stomp what Intel had to offer. Therefore, I'm hearing that we're going to see Alchemist kind of phased out and replaced pretty quickly. I'd even heard it could be 6 to 8 months after Gen 1 of HPG launches, although someone else told me it could be longer, up to 12 months, but I'm not so sure about a year. Like, that would be a long time into the future. So, what do I think of all of this, guys? Well, Intel are definitely here to play, and I think it's going to be a very interesting situation that we're left in. But I think Intel's goals right now are going to be to take over the mobile market, as I've discussed ad nauseum. And I think that they really, 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 really want to work with games developers. And I genuinely feel that we're going to see a lot of marketing efforts around games and, well, again, mobile. But it's going to be very fascinating to me how AIBs and just in general, the market is going to adapt to Intel getting involved. I do feel that Nvidia and AMD both understand that Intel are bringing a huge amount of cash to bear on this, guys. It's, you know, Intel have a lot of money at the end of the day. It's that simple. And if Intel want to do something, they have the funds to do it, assuming they have the willpower to do it. And I think that Intel now are a very different company compared to 4, 5 years ago, where honestly there were so many issues with the company. Now, Intel you know, under new leadership with major changes, not just in terms of CEO, but up and down the board, if you excuse the pun, it's a very different company. And I very much look forward to seeing what Intel can bring to the table, or your PCIe slot. With that said, thank you very much for checking out the video. I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.